So far in this course of tribal sociology, we have been trying to know about the different tribal people living in various zones of the length and breadth of the country. But in doing so, we have only been trying to know their variety, their cultural diversity, and things like that, as if no change has been taking place in the life of the tribal people. Of course, the change that take place in the life among the tribal people is much slower compared to the fast life of cities even in India. But from now onwards, we will try to understand the kind of changes that are taking place in the life of the tribal people. To start with, we look at two concepts which have directly impinged upon emphasizing the changes that are taking place. The terms are Hinduisation and Sanskritization. The term Sanskritization, however, owes to the doyen of social sciences in India, late M.N. Srinivas. Hinduisation and Sanskritization are both referring to the Hindu way of life by and large. In that sense, Hinduization is a generic term, Sanskritization is a specific emphasis on the type of changes that take place in the life of people in any given group. Hinduization means the general process of influence that the larger Hindu community has been casting upon the tribal people. This influence has been mostly seen in the ways the people worship by and large, because Hindus is a religious way of life by and large. Tribal people who come into contact with the larger Hindu population do get influenced and mimic some of the ways in which rituals are performed by the larger Hindu community. Such has been the influence on the traditions of the tribal people who have come into contact. There has been mutual participation, and of course, most of the time the mutual participation is on the occasion of the larger religious festivals of the centers in the neighborhood of tribal people. Wherever Hindu pilgrim centers are there and the annual or biannual programs take place with large gatherings, like what you might have heard of the 59-day Kumbh Mela that attracted lakhs and lakhs of people from throughout the world. So, whenever such festivals take place among the Hindu people, the neighboring tribal people do come and participate to whatever extent they could. So, such has been the mutual influence between the tribal and non-tribal people. When tribal people do come and participate, they will have their own contribution to make. Therefore, even non-tribals are often influenced by certain tribal ways of doing things. We come to another important term the moment we talk about the Hindu way of life, that is the term caste. A very interesting argument that castes have emerged from the tribal people. It's hard to believe for a typical devout Hindu man. Well, after all, tribes have been in existence much earlier than the name of caste we have heard of. Often enough, the introduction of caste system is identified with the incoming Aryans, and tribal people have been living in different parts of India from much earlier times. When people talk about the argument that castes have emerged from the tribal people, the most open reference is to Kshatriyas. Many Kshatriya groups after the Hindu system do derive the origin to some of the tribal ways of doing things. The most ready example are what the Chota Nagpur tribals refer to as Munda Raj, and Bhumil Raj of Birbhum district, and Rajgond Raj of Gondwana land. A very interesting term emerged out of this argument of that castes have emerged from tribal life. That is the term tribal caste. It's a very interesting term because often enough tribe and caste are distinguished as totally different from each other. In fact, the way anthropologists have made us believe, an average tribe does not have caste system. Caste system is something very unique to the larger Hindu society. Therefore, when the two opposite terms like tribe and caste are put together in the concept of tribal caste, it makes it very interesting. But of course, the use of this term is not without ground. In fact, there are certain groups among the tribals which directly claim Brahmin status. The most ready example are the Bauris of West Bengal. They have 11 days mourning after the death of a family member, like we see in the larger Hindu society. They have the other important symbol of the high caste life, that is a sacred thread. Of course, the two broad divisions among the larger Hindu society, that is Vaishnavism, Vishnu worshippers, and worship of Shiva. So, there are tribals who fall in line with Vaishnavism, and they also worship whom they call Sitla Mansa, referring to the Ramayan heroine Sita, obviously. And then Lord Mahadeva becomes another important god for the tribals because of this influence of Hindu way of life. In fact, some tribes go even to the extent of telling that Bauri, a member of their tribe, has been the first domestic servant of Lord Mahadeva. Another interesting example of this kind of a trend of tribal caste are Mahalis of West Bengal. In fact, among the Mahalis in West Bengal, one can see perfect Hinduization, a total Brahminic pattern in their way of life. Coming back to the term of Sanskritization, which, as I said, was coined by M.N. Srinivas, who said he was so convinced about the process of Sanskritization, by which he meant lower caste groups copy the models of ways of life of the higher caste people, and the higher caste people themselves drawing the ideals from the Sanskritic texts. So, the term Sanskritization. Now, back to the term Sanskritization for a moment. Strictly speaking, when late Professor M.N. Srinivas coined the word Sanskritization, he had originally used the word Brahminization. Thereby, in his own mind, probably, he presumed that the Brahmins derived their ideals from the Sanskritic texts. So, he directly used the word Brahminization to begin with. But then there were other researchers in other parts of India who claimed that what happens in certain communities where there are no Brahmins at all, like for instance the Rajputs in Rajasthan. There are any number of villages with no Brahmins around, and Jatsiks of the northern parts of India, where also there may be no Brahmins. Then they came up with parallel terms like Jatsikization and Rajputization. Srinivas quickly restructured his definition and used the word Sanskritization, dropping the term Brahminization. But in the back of his mind, Srinivas was so convinced that the ideals are drawn from the Sanskritic texts, that is, the different epics. To give one ready example of the influence of Sanskritization among the people of the lower caste groups is the practice of teetotalism, that is, giving up alcohol, giving up non-vegetarian food, and also giving up smoking. Together they are called teetotalism. So, one of the significant ways lower caste groups tries to Sanskritize is taking to teetotalism. Ideas and practices are drawn from the great tradition. Now, great tradition is a relative term. Great tradition is the term referred to the larger community. In contrast, the tradition of the tribal people would be referred to as the little tradition. And the practice transference that takes place between the great tradition and the little tradition are both ways. That means, some from great tradition are copied by the little tradition, and some from the little tradition are copied by the great tradition. And in fact, the terms for these processes would be referred to as universalization and parochialization. Universalization, when items from the smaller tradition, the little tradition, are carried over to the great tradition, and they become part of the ways of doing things in the larger community. And the reverse of it, that is, certain practices copied by the little tradition from the great tradition to suit the locally available materials and ways of doing things, would be known as parochialization. A word about Hinduism. How do people do get influenced by Hinduism by and large. In fact, Hindus, as I said earlier, are known for religious ways of doing things. Therefore, among the Hindus, the centers of pilgrimage become very, very important in their way of life. And sometimes it is referred to as Sanskritic Hinduism, because most of these centers of pilgrimage do have the Sanskritic ways, including the chanting of mantras in the Sanskrit language. So, it is referred to as Sanskritic Hinduism. Of course, one should not forget that the movement that came up against the Brahmins, starting in Tamil Nadu particularly, was in the forum of introducing Tamil in place of Sanskrit. Therefore, it is important for us to note that Sanskritic Hinduism has had a distinct influence on the tribal life, particularly in parts of India other than down south. Sanskritic scriptures are different languages. In fact, Sanskritic scriptures got translated into different languages only after this influence of Hindus on the larger communities. In fact, Ramayana and Mahabharata, which have got translated into several other Indian languages, are solid examples of how Hinduism has been trying to spread its influence on other communities in the neighborhood which are not the caste Hindus as such. One of the most important influence of Hindu way of life on the tribal people is the change from monotheism to polytheism. Hindu communities, Hindu way of life, Hindu religion has always been known the world over for multiplicity of gods and goddesses. Any average tribe, not only in India, in fact, anywhere in the world, is normally known for worshipping just one god or one goddess. That too, not even in the human form. It may be in some kind of a symbol, even a kind of a spear, kind of the trident that we have in the Hindu society. Any symbol, even the totem symbol, totem itself would be identified as a god or a goddess. So, an average tribe in India has been always known for monotheism, that is identifying only one god or one goddess. But Hindu influence has opened them up into polytheism. Of course, universalization process that has taken place in tribal life when it comes to religious ways of life is to identify their own god or goddess with the Hindu pantheon. Therefore, any god that they are worshipping, depending on the neighborhood Hindu community, would be identified as an incarnation of Vishnu on the one hand or incarnation of Shiva on the other. Similarly, goddess as an incarnation of Lakshmi or an incarnation of Parvati. Such has been the influence of the Hinduistic way of life on the tribal people. Now, we will come to the most important part of the life of the people that is taking place, and especially after the interaction between the tribals and non-tribals, that is the concept of social mobility. Now, the basic question, Sanskritization, as Srinivas argued, results in some kind of mobility. Please note, social mobility is not physical mobility. Social mobility basically refers to the movement of the people higher or lower in the hierarchical order. Here we need to note at once that traditionally an average tribe has not been known at all for hierarchy, except the tribal leader, who would be the unquestioned topmost person among the tribal people. The rest of them would be dealing with each other on egalitarian basis. But particularly after the influence of Hinduism and Sanskritization process, there has been some attempt of social mobility among the tribal people. Otherwise, moving up or down of any hierarchy, or basically the concept of any hierarchy itself, has not been quite well known in an average tribe. They choose certain relationships. For instance, Sanskritization, depending on where they want to move. There are tribal caste groups who take to the way of life of the valiant Kshatriyas, thereby they get into the Kshatriya under the hierarchical arrangement. In fact, Kshatriya level has been one of the easiest for tribal people to get into the caste structure. Brahmins has been very difficult because Brahmins have always been the most ideal way of life among the Hindus. But one thing very crucial about the Brahmins, historically Brahmins in India have always been known about being very positive and pragmatic and falling in line with the ruling kings. And there have been instances also of the tribal group going ascending into the tribal and into the caste hierarchy, getting into the Kshatriya level and having some of the local Brahmins to assist them in performing rituals. In this sense, one of the highest caste groups, Brahmins, becomes in a way subservient to a converted tribal group, because Brahmins have always been very pragmatic in approaching those in power. If the tribal people became the local kings and had power, Brahmins were pragmatic enough to fall in line with them and serve those in power. Learned Brahmins patronized the kings. In fact, Hindu history is replete with examples of almost every king having a Brahmin as an advisor. Finally, we should note that every religious center in India in its own way has been a source of Sanskritization. In fact, the first thing that tribal people who want to become socially mobile will do is to get in touch with these religious centers, go and participate in their annual, biannual or occasional celebrations and make their own contributions, including various donations of their own artifacts and also in the cultural programs of the particular religious center during the Mela. All through India's history, learned Brahmins have always been patronized by the kings. It's in a way kind of symbiotic relationship. Brahmins depended on the kings for their own livelihood and kings depended on the Brahmins as advisors for various problems that they were facing in their own kingdom. But in one way, every religious center has been a source of Sanskritization for the larger population, tribal as well as non-tribal. And the occasions where mostly this takes place are the various melas, the annual programs of celebrations of particular religious center, where tribals come into contact with the non-tribals. They make their own contribution in the form of artifacts and also in the form of service, intermingling with the non-tribal people. In fact, the religious centers have been one of the greatest sources of changes that come about among the tribal people. In this particular episode, we have been trying to understand with special emphasis on the changes that have been taking place, because earlier we studied the tribals as if there are no changes. Two or three things to highlight in this particular episode: the concept of Sanskritization, a very specifically defined term in order to identify the types of changes that take place among the tribal people who want to participate in the larger Hindu society and become part of the local hierarchy of the larger Hindu caste society. And a very interesting term that came in is tribal caste. Although tribe and caste are always contrasted as two different and distinct concepts, but tribal caste, where these two terms are put together, presents a very interesting argument. After all, tribes have been in existence much earlier than the caste Hindus came into existence. Therefore, the argument that some of these castes are origins from the tribal people themselves. Some examples we have noted are the Kshatriyas as well as the Brahmins. The Kshatriyas from the middle and the western parts of India, Rajasthan, Madhya Pradesh and Gondwana, and particularly the Brahmins in West Bengal, who beat out the larger non-tribal Brahmins in their way of life, following almost everything that the Brahmins follow in their routine way of life, as well as the occasional situations in Brahminic way of life.